The Green Bay Packers don't care about consensus rankings. They care about athleticism and age in the first round. So who fits all of this? Who could be the surprise first round pick this year?
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet. And the show for fans who know what happened, they want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Last minute tickets at the lowest price, guaranteed. I was trying to find a new way to talk about this Packers season, frankly. And I was thinking about the draft in different ways. How haven't we approached it yet? And it hit me that we haven't talked about the reach part of this. Now, people are going to get mad. Don't get mad. Teams go by their boards. So when they pick a player, it is not a reach for them. Usually, that's the whole thing. Sometimes teams reach and know that they reach. I'm like, that's fine too. But relative to consensus, the Packers have no problem saying, we don't care what everyone else thinks. This is what we think about this player. And I understand that process, right? But it's also true, and I believe this because history and the data bear this out. The further afield you get from consensus, the more likely you are to miss. Now, you also have famous hits. The Packers have them. Josh Sitton was like an undraftable player, except he became an all-pro for the Packers. We remember those. We don't remember all the times where they drafted who, and then that player turned out to be Cheeks. We just don't remember that, right? Because everyone went, who? And they confirmed our priors by not being very good, right? So I went back and looked. Darnell Savage was the 21st pick. He was 42nd on the Athletic Big Board. So that's the consensus board as compiled by Arif Hassan. Not what he thinks, but what the crowds think, the people who analyze this for a living. I feel like I have to couch that every time because people go, oh, well, what does the Athletic know? It's not about the Athletic. This is what the crowd thinks. Jordan Love was 35th on the consensus board. He was the 26th pick. They traded up to get him. They traded up for Darnell Savage as well. Eric Stokes was 46th on the big board. He's 29th. Or he went 29th. Quay Walker was the 22nd pick. 51st. A full round of reach according to the consensus. By the way, consensus looks like they're right on that one. And then Christian Watson, 34. He was drafted. They moved heaven and earth to get him, multiple second round picks. Traded up to get him at 34. He was the 49th player on the big board. That one, you can see how that could work out. And you see why there's a reason when they're prioritizing athleticism, they're going, we understand these players might not be for everyone, but we believe by betting on the traits, we're willing to stomach a little bit more risk than the average evaluator might because we believe in our institutional ability to develop talent. I really think that's what it is. They believe in their ability to identify traits, key traits, and say we can take players with the uncoachable ability, the athletic stuff that you just can't imbue that into someone else and say, we'll fix anything else. The technique stuff we can fix. The the instinct stuff, we can at least help. That's the job of a team. You pick someone who can do things you can't coach, and then you coach everything else. That's how this ought to work. So as I went down the list, and it's not actually a long list, but I wanted to try and figure out, okay, who are the guys where you go, okay, this would be a little surprising, but upon further examination would not be surprising. And just trying to keep this within, 20, 25 picks. So you're really only getting to like 50. Because I didn't have enough players, I kind of pushed it because I just assume, okay, receivers got to be out. Bad athletes got to be out. And I didn't do the thing that I did in 2022 and said, they're not going to take an off-ball linebacker because they never do that. And they're not going to take an old because they never do that. They did both in 2022. So I have to be a little careful. I'm keeping the scope broad. So the top of this list is someone we've talked about recently, Jordan Morgan, the offensive lineman from Arizona. I think he can play right tackle. I think he can play either guard spot. And I don't know if he can snap, but I would give him a shot at center. Not a super tall guy, so you're not, having any issues there. In the first round, we're talking about a relative athletic score over 9, held his own against Leatu Latu from UCLA, who's going to be a first-round pick pass rusher. I think he can play tackle for you, but his best spot is as a guard, and his best scheme is a zone scheme like the Packers want to run. His ability to play in space, to block guys on the move is really good. This would not be surprising. Don't let it surprise you at 25 or 41. Now, I think the widest disparity is with someone like Edrin Cooper, the linebacker from Texas A&M. Daniel Jeremiah thinks we're talking about a top 20 kind of player, top 25 kind of talent. Whereas Pro Football Focus, for example, thinks he's more like mid to late second round. He's 39 on the consensus board. So that would be, a 14 pick, quote unquote, reach. Kind of in line with Darnell Savage, not quite to the Quay Walker level, in line with the Eric Stokes level, and supreme athleticism. You're betting on he can get downhill, he can accelerate and close with burst and force to the ball carrier, the quarterback, especially when he blitzes. He is a nightmare to deal with. He is what they wanted Quay Walker to be, but never quite became. And so, for that reason, he makes a lot of sense. But as we get closer, I'm really narrowing my focus on a couple key players. We talked about Cooper DeJean the other day. If they want him, he tested terrific. Less than a month off of getting cleared for movement, basically, for full go movement. He went out and runs low 4.4s at 200 plus pounds, broad jumps over 10, like elite athleticism. One of the 30 most athletic corners, if he's a corner, since 1987. He probably not going to be there at 25. I didn't think he was going to be there at 25 before. I think he's a top 20 player. The athleticism says, yep, confirmed, he's a top 20 player. If they want that guy, they're going to have to move up. He is one of those players that I do think you can say, okay, this guy no matter what. Now, the other guy, this is the surprise. I've been saying his name wrong. I think I'm saying it right now. Kingsley Suamataia. He played right tackle at BYU 2 years ago. Played left tackle last year and didn't look fully comfortable until the end of last season. But he just turned, in January, 21. Relative athletic score over 9. Terrific size, terrific athleticism, requisite arm length, all that stuff. A tackle, a true tackle. But not so tall, not so perfectly a tackle. Like, not so ideally suited to play tackle that you couldn't play him at guard if you wanted to. I don't know why my brain froze there for a second. he is the guy, 53 on the consensus board. That would be a Quay Walker-like, in fact, almost the exact same, Quay Walker-like quote-unquote reach. But the difference would be you have high levels of play on tape in college. That's a big deal to me. Premium position, that's another big deal. And like bona fide starting experience. Quay Walker was rotating with Channing Tindall, who's not really an NFL player, at Georgia. Like, not even the guy playing. He wasn't even playing 90. Like, Peyton Wilson never came off the field at North Carolina State. Quay Walker was off the field like half the time. I know he went to Georgia, but like, Georgia's not the literal NFL. So it's not like if Channing Tindall was on North Carolina State, Peyton Wilson, and I don't even think Peyton Wilson is that good, but like, I don't think they would be rotating snaps. This would be a quote-unquote reach where you'd go, I get it. I see the plan here. I see the vision. And I have seen, I know Nate Tice thinks that Suamataia is a late first-round kind of player. So do I. That's one of the reasons why I have him on this list, because I was like, that's kind of what's like sparked this in my brain, as I was watching him going, holy crap, the Packers could take this guy at 25, and I think it would be justified. And people would go, what? And I went to find him on the consensus board. Sure enough, 53. I think I took him at 41 the other day in our mock draft. I believe it was our mock draft Monday. So this is one of those names to circle, to highlight, to bold, to underline. At 25 and definitely at 41. Definitely at 41. If you trade up without giving up 41, if you can go 58 and 25 to move into the teens to get Coop or Quinion Mitchell, and then you stick and pick at 41 and you can get a Jordan Morgan or a Kingsley Suamataia. I'm going to get it right. I think that's right. That makes a ton of sense for the Packers. And it would be very Packersy to do both of those things, because Brian Gutekunst likes to trade up in the first round to get his guys. And he's occasionally will go, no, I don't care about consensus. I'm going to get this guy. And in the case of Suamataia, I think it is absolutely justified. Now, speaking of reading the tea leaves a little bit, I want to look at the top 30 visits. What do we learn? We got a couple new ones. What are we gleaning from this, if anything? I like to look for trends if we can find some. Let's do that in just a second here on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at BetterHelp. What's the first thing you'd do if you had an extra hour in the day? I'd probably read a book, sip my coffee. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what really makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. And thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. A free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I track these. The top 30 visits. And I try and figure out if there are things that we can glean from these. And Ted Thompson basically never used these top 30 visits on first round, second round, third round kinds of players. It was almost exclusively day 3 UDFA recruiting. And the Packers, there's plenty of names on this list for whom that is true. The only position right now where they have a concentration of players is early offensive line, in particularly the 2 tackles that they brought in, Amarius Mims from Georgia and Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma. These are reported visits. We don't get official numbers on this, so I'm relying on the reporting here. Amarius Mims is obvious why you'd want to have him in for a visit if you had any inclination you might want to draft him. And I would have an inclination to want to draft him. The talent, I know 8 starts, is off the chart at his size. But you want to get the story from him. Hey, what happened? Why did this not work out differently for you? Same thing for Tyler Guyton, who transferred from TCU. We're talking about, I believe, 14 starts, like not that many more starts in his collegiate career at Oklahoma. A bit of an older prospect as well. I think it's going to be 23 as a rookie. Doesn't have a lot of experience. Like, I think you could make the case for someone like Kingsley Suamataia at 21 with 2 years of starting experience. He's played more games in his collegiate career than Tyler Guyton. Just as athletic. But I understand why you'd want to talk to Tyler Guyton. And then Zach Zinter from Michigan. He's a more of a day 2 kind of guy. Interior offensive lineman, so that's a little bit different. It is interesting that at the top, we're talking about tackles. No Graham Barton here. No Zach Frazier, who, by the way, I don't think is the kind of guy I'd want to take where his projected draft spot is anyway. And by the way, I don't think he's going to go as high as he's being projected currently. I think he's going to go late day 2, early day 3, maybe even later than that. Sorry, late round 2, early round 3, not day. Late day 2 makes sense for him. Now, some day 2 players that I'm interested in. Michael Hall, the defensive tackle from Ohio State. Jarian Jones, the corner who's a potential slot from Florida State. But there's no tie in there. Now, there are a lot of day 3 DBs. I think they're going to throw some major day 3 draft capital at DBs. And what they may be doing is saying, someone like Coop, who can play boundary, can play in the corner, or can play in the slot, can play safety. Minkah Fitzpatrick kind of chameleon for you. Malcolm Jenkins kind of chameleon for you. Can play a little bit of everywhere. That getting someone like that, along with Xavier McKinney, who can also play a little bit of everywhere, makes it so you don't have to commit to your corner room now. You can 4th round, 5th round, 6th round, go tackle it that way. Jaquan Shepard from Maryland, a visit. Chris Edmonds, who's a kind of a safety hybrid player, Arizona State. I mentioned Jarian Jones, though he's more of a day 2 guy. Keaton Oladapo from Oregon State, Maguilone's guy. By the way, Bleacher Report has him as a top 50 player. I don't think that's going to happen, but you never know. It only takes one team. Our guy, Edgerrin Cooper, is on this list. An interesting one. He is, not that I would advocate for it, because I think 25 would certainly be too early on my consensus board, the consensus that has been reached in my brain with my, myself, the royal we. I think there's a good chance he's definitely in the small circle of guys that I think are going to be very much in play at 25. Now, if he's the only guy in that circle and you can't get the trade to work for Cooper and Edge is your guy, like I probably would want to move back unless you think he's just so much better than all the other linebackers. And by the way, I do. But I just don't want to take a linebacker 25. I just don't want to do it. But I think the Packers would be willing to, because we know they've done it. We know they are willing to. They did it at 22 just 2 years ago. I'm a little surprised we don't see more running backs on this list. Ray Davis from Kentucky is the only one, probably a day 3 kind of player, someone who I think the Packers could have interest in. They're going to take a day 3 running back, like for sure. And then 2 Alabama players I am very interested in. And we're going to talk about one of them, not in depth in that we're going to break him down, but what he would potentially represent to close the show. But Kool-Aid McKinstry is someone, and our pal Jen Curtin, who's a longtime everydayer, has requested basically a full episode on Kool-Aid. Our pal Eric Crocker from over at Locked On 49ers, former pro DB, played in the NFL, thinks Kool-Aid is CB1 in this draft. It makes sense to have someone like this in. Elite prep recruit, comes to Alabama as a teenager, plays, produces man-to-man coverability. I think he is in that short list, but didn't always want to tackle. Where do they think his... does the not wanting to tackle extend to other parts of his personality? I guess would be the question that you'd want to have answered. In other words, is this someone who you can count on to be committed to your program? Because some of these 5 stars come in with an attitude. This is true of every position, by the way, not just corners. That they don't have to work as hard, they don't have to play as hard, and that's not what you want. So they want to know what this guy's about. I get it, because the talent is evident on tape. And at 25, yeah, sign me up. I think that makes a lot of sense. And also you might want to get him, checked out medically. The Packers have one of the best lower body specialists in the world in their training room. So that's useful too. Jermaine Burton, the receiver from Alabama, was also in for a visit. That was yesterday, in fact. A receiver who potentially could be a day 2 player. Could the Packers be in the receiver market? In a very specific way. I think they can and will be, and maybe even should be. We'll talk about it next on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer you get to first pitch. So with killer last minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. Get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. And the Game Time guarantee means Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a ticket in the same section and row for less. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed. And thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So Jermaine Burton, why am I bringing this up? Why is this so unique? It's not really unique, right? But it got me thinking. Burton is a vertical receiver. And Christian Watson, who I think is more than a vertical receiver, but has the ability to take the top off, to threaten defenses down the field. And that is something that is incredibly valuable to this Packers offense. Whether he ever becomes or can consistently remain a true number 1 developmental kind of player, I don't know. And, we got some word from his dad, former NFL player himself, that they identified whatever the problem was, that they think it can be managed, that he's not going to have recurring issues moving forward. But let's say that's not true, or at least not true to the degree that they hope it is. Jayden Reed provided much more a vertical threat element from the slot than I thought he would or could. Romeo Doubs has more to give as a vertical threat, I believe, but he is not as dangerous vertically as Christian Watson. He's just not. And for as much as I love Dontavian Wicks and think he has the potential to be a terrific, terrific player, he's not a field stretcher. He can win vertically like Devontae Adams could. Not that they're the same player, but Devontae Adams was not a 4-3s guy like Christian Watson. But he could threaten defenses vertically. He drew attention because he's Devontae Adams. I don't think the Packers have a guy on this team currently who can command that sort of attention. But Christian Watson's speed, we saw it. Even when he was not making a bunch of big plays, he consistently drew attention. But if he's not on the field, you can't draw attention. Someone like Jermaine Burton, who has some questions about, apparently, it's reported issues about attitude and these kinds of questions. His ability to stretch the field is terrific. So if he's going end of the third round, beginning of the fourth round, that's the perfect place for the Packers to take a shot. To basically try and find MVS. Find someone who they can just run really fast and threaten a defense as Christian Watson insurance. Not against being a number one, because I think right now you feel like you're in a good position to say between Doubs, Reed, Wicks, Kraft, Musgrave, you have enough pass catching depth that you don't need that alpha number one. Even if some of those guys can be nice 1Bs or whatever it is. But none of those guys, certainly from the boundary, can threaten defenses the way Christian Watson can. And so finding that guy makes sense for the Packers, especially when you have extra picks, extra third round picks, for example. At 88-91, do you want to take a run at someone like Tez Walker, who, look, I don't love as a player, but he's big and he's fast. He can threaten defenses vertically. That makes a lot of sense to me to try and make something like that work. Now, are there a ton of options that the Packers also would go, hey, yeah, that guy fits our type of player and that kind of thing? Like, that's the problem, really. That's the problem, is there's not a lot of guys who are going to check all the boxes and be really fast. Because the guys who are big and fast tend to also be the best players. And so you're not going to get those guys later in the draft. That's sort of the whole point. Now, maybe someone like Cornelius Johnson from Michigan, who is, in fact, big and fast. Or maybe some of these guys fall. Like Jermaine Burton, by the way, 52nd on the Pro Football Focus big board. Further down the consensus board, and I heard Dane Brugler and Nate Tice from The Athletic talking about him like he's a, 3 to 5th kind of player. Well, that's a very different profile. If you can get him at 88, 91, or one of those 4th or 5th round picks, that risk profile is much less, and he comes into the room understanding, okay, I got to try and prove myself here. That is a different and importantly different kind of just proposition here, because the Packers have a class of receivers from last year and the year before who are legit. And so you don't need anyone coming in expecting, hey, I need to be receiver one. And you don't want those other guys to feel threatened like, oh, I have, this other guy coming in trying to take my spot. No. Someone coming in trying to be a complementary player. I think for the Packers, it makes a lot of sense to try and find a player like that, whether it is, in the middle of day 2, if they want to, they have the extra picks to do that. Especially you go up and if you do what I'm suggesting, you go up and get Cooper DeJean and then stick and pick at 41 and have Suamataia. You still have 88, you still have 91, and all your day 3 picks. Could you throw 88 or 91 at a receiver who you know at worst can just come in and be a field stretcher for you. I think that makes a lot of sense for the Packers, especially if you're going to throw picks at the problem at DB, try and add some depth at corner, at safety on day 3. Sounds good. Let it rip. All right, back tomorrow, much more. We've got some interviews coming up here before the draft. A lot of fun stuff to talk about. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you can get podcasts. YouTube, all your podcast platforms of choice. And then on the socials, Locked On Packers. We're doing a Q&A. So send your questions to our Locked On Packers Twitter, at Locked On Packers. Send your questions to our Locked On Packers Instagram, Locked On Packers. Can you do that on TikTok? Maybe. TikTok, comment on our YouTube page with your questions, and we will answer some at the end of this week. On Friday, we'll do all the social questions we will answer so you can stay Locked On Packers.